In this video, I'm just going to speak briefly about the histograms I depicted in the chapter relevant to the 5-point scales. I made the recommendation that if data are scored on a 5-point Likert scale, then you could possibly consider applying a parametric statistic on those data and trust standard errors in the p-values that might result from parametric analyses on those data. But I do qualify that recommendation on the basis that the observed data are actually consistent with a 5-point scale. And I present to you an item that's from a real questionnaire that is, I take criticism from colleagues personally, and you can see that there are some people who say almost never, and there are some people who say almost always, and there are a bunch of people in between. This is the type of histogram that I'd expect to see from data scored on a 5-point Likert scale that might be suitable for parametric analyses. By contrast, and all too often in reality, what you get is a histogram more like this, where nobody said almost never to the item, I create a positive work environment for others. Nobody said almost never, and very few people said seldom. So this part of the distribution is basically missing, and this would not be consistent with the recommendation of a 5-point Likert scale being appropriate for parametric analyses. It's just nowhere near sufficiently normally distributed. Now, exactly what level of distribution you need, I think, is an open question. But just be honest with yourself. Is it something like this where you have people responding to each point in the 5-point Likert scale with most people scoring in the middle? Or is it really something like this? Now, in this questionnaire that I looked at histograms for several of the items, and you can see that several of them actually are not really consistent with a true 5-point scale. This is another item where it's not sufficiently close for me to feel comfortable that I could analyze these data with parametric statistics. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention is that there are cases where you want to estimate the correlation between Likert scales or other types of limited information ordinal scales, where you want to apply something called a polychord correlation. That would actually be the better approach. And so you have to think of what your research question is to best determine whether you want to apply a polychord correlation or a Pearson correlation on Likert data, such as this 5-point Likert scale. And I talk about that in the chapter devoted to correlation, the distinction between polychord and Pearson correlations, and you might want to check that out.